Hey guys, on this episode, we talked to Angela Stopper. She is the Chief Learning and Development Officer for UC Berkeley. She is a total forward thinker, and we kind of get into why learning and development falls flat, why organizations and why leaders don't brush enough crumbs off the table to allow for the time and the money to build people up. And we talk about some of the impacts that come from putting your money where your mouth is and really creating a space for that prioritizes people. So I hope you guys enjoy it.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, hey bestie, hope you're having an amazing day. Your smile lights up every room you step into. You see what happens when you subscribe to the Ethics Experts? You get a bonus greeting on every episode. So hit that subscribe button as we change the world by making our workplaces better. Got a real treat for everyone today. We have Angela Stopper. She is the Chief Learning Officer at UC Berkeley. How's it going, Angela?
It's going great. How are you doing?
Good. Excited to get you on. In our pre-show, you talked about something interesting that I think we all kind of aspire to build in our organizations, and that's kind of having a true learning culture, a true coaching culture. You have a pretty interesting background on how you've landed in the spot that you're in, so I want to hear a little bit about that for sure. But just at a high level, what do you think a coaching culture or a true learning culture generates, and why is that so hard for most organizations to achieve?
Yeah, I think at a very high level, when you have a true coaching culture, when you have a true learning culture, people can come to work as their full selves and know that they're going to be supported and championed to be successful in their role as a human, as a person, that managers are going to help them be successful, that the leadership cares about them being successful. And that's everybody from the very frontline workers to the most senior people in the organization. They feel supported, they feel cared for, they feel like what they do matters, and they feel like they know where to ask for support when they need it. And I think there's a lot of things that makes that hard. I think having that kind of a safe space to ask for help when you need help is hard.
Right.
Finding the time to care about people as their full person is hard. Asking good questions and listening to answers and then responding to those answers is hard. It's hard to not get defensive. It's hard as a human to not defend and try to champion your own views. So all of those things hurt when you're building a true learning culture that sees individuals as the individual that they are and the power that they bring to their position, to their role, to the organization as a whole. So
I think that's spot on. How do you deal with the challenge? How do you deal with what I would call the last mile? So you have a team of people that are all on board with that approach. They're on board with that ethos, right? And so we have that on sort of the one hand. And then on the other hand, we know that the majority, probably 80% of someone's experience at work or experience of an organization is unduly, wrong word maybe, but there's an outsized impact on that experience rooted in the person that they report to, and just the people that they're surrounded by, which then makes it critical for us to bridge that gap between sort of well-intending people in these sort of central functions learning or DEI or whatever, and that experience that an individual is having day to day, because they're probably not interacting with you day to day. They're at least interacting with their manager a lot more. So what strategies have you figured out to bridge that gap more effectively to make sure that all these little sort of mini cultures, these little pods of culture that make up this sort of aggregate culture that is UC Berkeley, or that would define UC Berkeley, how do you ensure that those are relatively consistent or providing that same sort of employee experience?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I think the place where people sometimes get stuck is they try to find the one silver bullet that's going to do all that. And there isn't one answer. There's kind of a multi-prong approach, I think, to getting there. So you need a top down, you need a bottom up, you need something that people can coalesce around to build understanding of what that actually looks like. At Berkeley, we're very lucky to have a senior leader. So our chancellor, or if you're in an organization, it'd be like your CEO, who cares about people and cares about their development and wants people to succeed. I have a chief human resource officer. So our chief people and culture officer is my boss, who cares about people and wants them to succeed and wants people to be able to bring their full selves to work. And then we have people on campus who have a very kind of advocate personality. That is what Berkeley is. So people can be very vocal and they can talk about what they actually need. And sometimes it's ways that are a little confrontational, sometimes it's ways that aren't. But having kind of that top down and that bottom up structure, I think, is really helpful in making sure that this is something that everybody can see themselves in. But then you have to have something that people kind of coalesce around. So we're all speaking the same language. We have some kind of shared language around what does success really look like and what does that mean? And so we have principles of community that say when you show up at Berkeley, this is what you should be thinking about. And the principles of community are great. And in addition to that, we've updated our performance evaluation program to highlight more of those. So instead of just being a goals-driven organization, so the what you do, we've updated our performance program. So we talk about the what, we talk about the goals you accomplish, your job mastery, but we also talk about how you do it. We talk about collaboration as part of a successful employee evaluation. We talk about inclusion and belonging. We talk about innovation, which is really continuous improvement, but we call it innovation. So we say that to be successful in your role, these are the things you need to focus on. And then we tell managers they need to talk to their employees about this more than once a year. You need to have these conversations with employees a couple times a year, 3 times is what we say. And we have structured questions around how does a manager have a conversation around these different achievement criteria. We require everybody to have a professional development goal as part of their performance evaluation. We have a policy in place that says every employee gets 80 hours or 10 days to use for professional development. We encourage managers to put 5% time in everybody's job description for professional development. And so, we have a community of practice we have a lot of communities of practice and a lot of identity-based staff organizations.
What does that mean, communities of practice?
Yeah, so it's kind of grassroots efforts where employees have coalesced for a community of practice. It's around a function. And so we have a Cal coaching network where regardless of your job, if you want to learn more about coaching, you go hang out with people who want to learn more about coaching. And so you start building that community. We have a Cal facilitators network. We have identity-based staff organizations as well. We have the Cal Women's Network. We have our Lavender Cal, which is our LGBTQ plus network. We have our Black faculty and staff organization. We have all of these places where people can go to find either like groups with their identity or like groups with their jobs and their functions and things that interest them. And all of that we look at as professional development. We look at that as being part of the employee experience. And because we say you should be doing professional development as part of your job through our policies and our job descriptions and our job postings, and then we have all these opportunities for folks to be able to do professional development in those multiple different ways, I think it creates this tsunami wave of different ways of engaging different groups, hopefully in ways that are meaningful for them. Because to your point, you can't get everybody to come to a workshop to come to a speaker series because, it might not resonate with them.
Yeah, and it's so much more powerful when people are like self-selecting into those groups or into those opportunities. Like it's so much more impactful because whatever they take from that is more likely to actually be absorbed into their mind and heart and ultimately into the way that they do things. It sounds like you guys have really kind of put a really smart structure in place because from what I heard you say, you have kind of the top down and the bottom up. You have leadership that really cares about this stuff, but then you've also augmented these sort of more ethereal things of like an attitude or a vision or a goal or something with tangible, hey, 5% of your time or professional, an individual's professional development plan is obviously something that's very tangible and needs to be created. And then you also have these areas that people can self-select into, and they also have time kind of carved out. So, you just see like a lot of organizations say, we care most about people. And it's like, well, you look at their P&L and there's not even a line for learning and development. Or we care most about people and there's nothing sort of like corporately carved out in terms of policies to your point or, whatever, like a percentage of people's, time or, even salary that's, attributable to these types of things. And so it just sounds like you guys have really put your money where your mouth is. I want to dive into these like little network groups and just talk a little bit about the role that those have played and how those ended up kind of like emerging from the ether. Because at some point you didn't have those groups and now you do, and now you're seeing some of that benefit. You know, what's been the impact of those groups, and like how did you get to where you're at, where now you have this network? What did you call them? Kind of professional groups or something?
So we have communities of practice.
Communities of practice, yeah.
And identity-based organizations. So we call them, generally, we call them staff organizations.
Got you. Okay.
Yeah. Employee resource groups is something, another term that folks use. Yeah.
So how did, you know, you went from at some point having none of these or a few of these, and now you have a bunch of these. And so how did you get from there to here?
Yeah. So, you know, we've had these kind of pockets of people that want to bring others together and help them succeed for a very long time on our campus. So our campus is over 150 years old. And maybe it's just the culture of higher ed. Maybe it's who we are. You know, Berkeley has some of the best and brightest students in the world come here. We have some of the best and brightest faculty in the world come here. And we have some of the best and brightest staff on our campus. And those personalities, we also have a very strong advocacy culture. You know, Berkeley is the home of free speech. And so I think our culture has allowed people to say, hey, let's come together and help each other.
Right.
And, you know, our very first staff organizations are, you know, veterans. I mean, they're 60, 70 years old. These groups have been coming together and talking about kind of the functions of the work or the identity of the people and supporting each other and helping to be successful. But that has grown significantly because, you know, we have some of these groups that I mentioned have been around for a very long time. And then others see the power of bringing people together and supporting them. And so they've just kind of blossomed and grown. And a couple have been seeded. So when we were thinking about building a coaching culture on our campus, you know, one of the things that I said was we should really have a community of practice around this. And being the chief learning officer sitting in people and culture, which is what we call HR, I wasn't going to go out and do that, but I said it to a couple people on my team. They're like, that's a great idea. Let's make that happen. You know, and so
Right.
Again, it's really the people who are wanting to do that, bringing these groups together, and we give them a little bit of support. We should probably give them more support, but you know, funding is hard.
Sure.
So we give them a little bit of money. We give them tools to make listservs. We're hopefully trying to give them space where they can bring people together. You know, we give them Zoom, we give them to have virtual meetings when we're on campus. That there is some challenges around finding space, like dedicated space for these folks to come together. But those are kind of the questions that we're looking at to think about how can we take these grassroots efforts that happen organically and make sure we're supporting them. When I came into the role, I was looking around and I said, goodness, we have like 17 of these communities of practice. What do we in human resources do for these folks? And the answer was not a whole lot. And I said, well, how about I just start meeting with the leadership teams twice a year and just talking to them? And, you know, so we put the call out and we said, in these wonderful staff organizations, who wants to come in and talk to HR a couple times a year about what you're seeing, what you're feeling, what you need? You know, my boss, our chief people and culture officer, he talks with the staff organizations and helps them just to listen and elevate their messages. And so I think these things can happen organically. And as leaders in organizations, what's really important, instead of just always thinking about what are we going to build, what are we going to build, what are we going to build, take a look around and see what's already there.
Yeah, right.
And think about how can we support, how can we encourage, how can we champion. You need to build as well. But there's a lot, I think, happening within organizations that sometimes the higher up we get in those organizations, we miss it. We just don't see it. And it's just, you know, opening your door and saying, come talk to me. Talk to me about what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you need, and let's figure out how to do this together.
Why is that so hard for leaders to like lose sight of what's in place and what can be optimized versus just sort of building something new and avoiding that sort of natural redundancy of either efforts already made or creation of things that are already kind of partially exist? I mean, is it just complexity? Is it just sort of a natural thing that you have to fight against? What do you think?
Yeah, you know, I think there's a lot of research out there that talks about as you elevate in your career, you get less and less feedback, just generally. And there's a lot of reasons why that happens. It can happen because of ego. It can happen because of people being afraid to give you open and honest feedback. It can happen because, ego, you're not looking for feedback. It can happen just because of structure. So you're surrounded with like people, as you get into certain levels of the organization, all of a sudden, your educational backgrounds and your income and where you live and what you do, your shared experiences, they all become a little homogenous, right? And when you get into those non-diverse groups, I think groupthink happens in ways that people don't even realize.
Totally, yeah.
There's people sitting around a table and
your world is your world.
Yes,
you know
exactly.
What I mean? Yeah.
And if you're not really making time to go out and explore those other spaces, you're going to miss things.
Totally.
You're sitting around a table with everybody that makes six figures and lives in their own houses with a garage and 2 cars and 12 TVs and,
you forget what it was like eating ramen noodles or something.
Right. You forget living in an apartment with 4 other people in a 2-bedroom apartment because we're in the Bay Area and that's all you can afford. And so I think we just get into these spaces where we very unintentionally stop getting that honest, constructive feedback. And we paint these pictures of what the world looks like. And sometimes they're our view of the world, but maybe not the view of everybody else.
There's this new show that I saw an episode or 2 of on Apple TV called Loot, and it has Maya Rudolph, and she's this like tech billionaires. Have you seen it?
No, I've not.
Oh, it's just it kind of illustrates this thing that you're talking about. So she in the first episode, spoiler alert. Okay, you had your chance to plug your ears. She finds out that her, billionaire husband is cheating on her, and she gets a divorce. So then she finds herself with all this money that she's figuring out like what to do with, and it seems like she's probably going to go down this sort of charity route. But in her first press conference for her charity after the divorce, it was for like a bunch of sheltered women, and she's giving everybody gift bags of like all these like high end things, and it was just totally tone deaf, and it's like you can't help but do that. When your world changes so much, to your point, it takes that intentionality to like, re-empathize or whatever for what the average or what other people are sort of feeling in order to be effective in those spaces. To your point,
Yeah, and managers have a tough job, particularly middle managers.
Yeah.
What a tough job! Like you're managing a team, so your job is to take care of your team, to make your team successful, to support them in their success, and you're managing your boss, right? Your job is to make your boss look successful and to support them. And you probably have some individual contributor things that you're still doing as well. And so you're supporting your team, you're supporting your supervisor, manager, boss, whatever you want to call them. You're supporting your own activities. You probably have stuff going on outside of the office that you need to be worried about, right? Most of us have lives outside of our workday. And you're just, if you really don't set strong boundaries and know all the tricks about delegation and saying no, and you can get consumed in the fires.
Right.
You have to you constantly putting out fires, helping this person, supporting that person, working through this, helping someone thought partner on this, and you forget to lift your head up and just take that 40,000 foot view. And I always say, if you spend your day fighting fires, all you're going to do is fight fires because they're always going to come, and they will particularly come if you're not taking time to think strategically, think forward, think about the future, think about what you need to be doing to set yourself up for success. And those fires will totally consume you if you let them. They really will. The fixing and the supporting and all of that can totally consume your 9-10 hour days that we all spend at work these days. And so you have to be really intentional about saying, this is important and I am important. My success is important. My development as a manager is important. How can I pay attention to me? How can I pay attention strategically and thoughtfully, future focused?
Yeah, I think to your point, to be a great manager, you're kind of making bets on like there are a bunch of focus bets, and if you allow kind of whatever is dumped onto your plate to determine where your focus is put, then you're not necessarily making the right focus bets, because perhaps to your point, you have to kind of lift your head up. The best bet of the use of your time or your focus would be to do something that's going to, stop a fire from happening, but you might not, have a point or have a chance to do if you're just like living in that firefighter's outfit all day,
Right. Yeah.
When you think about your organization, it sounds like you have some really great support from the top. Oh, what I was going to talk a little bit, I'll get to that in a second, but what I was going to talk about is how like glaringly apparent it is to me the role that that the culture of UC Berkeley plays in the success of your your role and your department's mission. It's just interesting, Berkeley is the as you said, the sort of home of free speech. So you're going to be selecting in, that's going to attract the type of talent, whatever, students, teachers, whatever, that resonate with that sort of an ethos. And that advocacy, that heart of advocacy, that being such a like inherent pillar of the UC Berkeley culture, leads to a lot of advocates are like willing to do something. It's like part of the definition. You know what I'm saying? It's like if I'm advocating, I'm taking some kind of an action, and so it's like the fodder you have there is poised to drive those changes forward. So we always talk about culture as like this. If it sort of surpasses a certain tipping point where the vision for that culture is actually being lived out to some degree, it can really turn into this really powerful flywheel where now you don't have to create all those things yourself, or your department doesn't have to. The crowd can, you can source that from the crowd, which then becomes extremely powerful to drive this culture forward. So I'd like to talk a little bit about kind of that cultural aspect and like kind of just deconstruct it a little bit. And, you've worked at other organizations, and I'd like to maybe contrast, this sort of cultural, this heart, this sort of environment that you're in, how that is conducive for like more impact versus other places you may have worked or spent time where the clarity of purpose or the clarity of culture maybe isn't, to the extent it is here, and what difficulties that led to.
Yeah. I think everybody has the opportunity to do this, to be this kind of passionate culture that we have at Berkeley. I think everybody has the opportunity. Some people choose to really grab a hold of it and take hold of it. Some people are very busy thinking about other things that they think are important.
Right.
I think, to your point, I've been in organizations where they've said learning and development matters. And we're going to put you in this building over here and be in the basement, and you can maybe have a trainer and,
here's some legal pads.
Figure it out, and luckily I've not had to work in many of those organizations. I have colleagues who have been in those spaces, and we've kind of commiserated over that together. And it's to your earlier point about if it matters, you need to put the resources behind it. And sometimes those resources don't necessarily need to be money. Sometimes they're just the leader of the organization standing up and saying, I care about this, and let me tell you what I did. I care about this. This matters to me. Let me show you what I did by the actions that I take. And so I think that every organization, if you truly do buy into this and you truly think that this is a way to move your organization forward, there are ways to do it that are authentic for you, that probably don't cost a ton of money, but it's really just getting people to tell the story, sing from the same, songbook, whatever the cliche is you want to talk about, just making sure that the words that are coming out of the leader's mouth match the actions that the leaders are actually taking. You can't say we care. Like, one of my favorite things is when people do surveys. They do employee engagement surveys, say, and they get the results, and then they read the results, and then they either throw them in the bin, or they put it in a drawer, or they have lots and lots of meetings about it and don't do anything. The worst possible thing you can do as a leader in an organization is ask people for their opinions and then not come back to them and tell them what you learned.
Right.
So, if you do a survey, read it, even if it's terrible, go out with a roadshow and be like, here's what we heard. And thank you for giving us this feedback. Here's what we're going to do about it. Here's the action you're going to see us take. Even if the actions are small, tell people what you're going to do about it. If you can't do something about it, say, thank you for letting us know. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about that right now, but we're going to keep it in our mind. Hey, do you have some ideas? Could you share with us some ideas about things we might do to fix this, to help this, to support this? So you do your roadshow, you collect more information, you make a plan, And then you tell people where you got, you come back to them and say, a year ago we were here. This is what we've done. Let's do another survey. Let's figure out. But so many people, I think, gather this information and then they talk about it with that table of like-minded people, and they feel like they're doing great things because 30 people sit around a room and they talk about it, they care about it, and they make a plan, and then they just forget to tell the other 3,000 people in the organization what the plan is or what they did. I think that's where organizations get stuck.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, nobody's like forced to work anywhere. I mean, we all have to work probably, but like you don't have to work in your organization or our organization. People people like voluntarily come to work every day. You know what I'm saying?
And some voluntarily don't come to work.
True. Yeah, that's right. But I'm saying it's all based on some kind of a choice. It's not like a gulag or something. But to your point, I think for a long time, organizations have been able to sort of get away with not doing what you're talking about. And I think if we can reframe that that collective and what this actually is, and understand that this is really a relationship between an individual and an organization, and we can understand like what's important in any relationship, any sort of fruitful relationship. It has certain elements, right? There's a trust there. There's a two-way streetedness, new word, new term, whatever. It's a number of different sort of qualities. And to the extent an organization can try to, make those same types of connections, I think they're going to be a lot more successful. But like if the average employee is not in that sort of 30-person meeting where all the feedback is being discussed, and they never hear that their feedback was even listened to, that's like me talking to a wall. You know what I'm saying? It's like, well, why would I ever talk to this wall again? I'm not getting anything back from it. Why is that such a hard thing to do for folks? Is it just too complex? Do they get lost in the minutia? Do you think they get lost in that meeting, that 30-person meeting, and they can sort of pat themselves on the back and look at each other as all those folks go to the same coffee machine, after the meeting to say like, wow, we really care. Like that just seems like such a critical piece of the puzzle that can do so much if you can get it right and put a little intentionality around it. And yet you and I are talking about it because it's not being done everywhere.
Right. I think it's a lot of what you're saying. So people have the meeting and they're like, we reacted to this feedback. Yeah. It's like, yeah, you reacted to it in a way that you didn't let anybody know you were reacting to it. So that's completely unintentional. I'm sure that's unconscious, where people are saying, well, we did something about it. Yeah. Look what we did.
I mean, and I've fallen victim to this myself, by the way. Like, I think what you're describing is right. But like, why is that last mile not part of the equation? It's crazy.
Right. And I think, fear probably has a little bit to do with it as we move up in organizations, particularly, organizations that have certain reputations for excellence. I think leaders are afraid to say, I don't know, or I can't, or help me. I think that can be a really scary space. I think when you get feedback that's shocking, it can be hard to not be defensive. And if you go out with that defensive mindset, it doesn't matter what you say. People are like, oh yeah, whatever. So, it's we think we're doing things, but it's just not communicating down. It's not spreading down. We might be afraid to do things because we don't have the answer. We might, be time bound by other things. Like we have this employee experience conversation. We know we have to have it, but goodness, the budget deficit and the argument in the House of Representatives, or the, war in the Middle East, the war in Europe, these things impact our day-to-day lives. And sometimes those very important conversations about employees, the lifeblood of our organizations, they're maybe not on fire. So
yeah, I think that's right.
They're doing okay. Boy, if we did something, that'd be great, but it's good. So let's worry about this other thing. I think all of that kind of comes together and makes these conversations not happen in ways that maybe they should.
Yeah, and I think that's a great rundown. It also, I think a part of it is like the cost or like the negative impact of that stuff on a group of massive people. It's so hard to like attribute it, and it's such like a slow burn versus like these explosions that happen when it's a budget thing or you lose a big client, depending on the organization type. Like those are naturally going to, I'm just saying like the people are, I think perhaps for some reason, like just easy to take for granted.
Yeah. And we have history in this country, and I think probably in most countries. If you think about the Industrial Revolution, the workers were the cogs in the machine.
100%.
That, if you stopped working, we'll call your brother
That's
in,
right.
or we'll call your sister in, or it, it was a different space. And so we've, for what, maybe 100 years, maybe 75 years, been working in this more of a knowledge economy. And employees are different in a knowledge
I
economy
agree.
than they are in a
I agree.
service economy
100%.
or an industrial production economy.
Right.
And so I think it just takes organizations a minute to catch up with, we're still running. COVID did a lot to change this, but pre-COVID, we were still running with the same worker mindset that we had when we were making assembly lines. Everybody show up at 8, everybody go to lunch at noon, everybody leaves at 5, you work Monday through Friday. We were literally working with industrial revolution type work models until COVID said, hey, everybody stay home. If there is one silver lining of COVID, I think it's that it caused us as organizations to say, is this thing that we think 100% necessary for success, is this just a habit? Can we rethink the way we do this? Can we rethink the way we're bringing people together? I think that has to happen because it's just a different world.
Totally. I actually we just gave a keynote, me and my brother, on this exact thesis yesterday, on these old structures, these old industrial revolution style structures that are still inhabiting our knowledge work economy, and they obviously do not work. The thing that's mind-boggling to me is that, to your point, I personally don't think it's been 100 years, but even if it's been 40 years, we're squarely in it. And if it's maybe I'm wrong about 40, it's definitely 20 years of us being squarely in this new era. And I think COVID will kind of serve as a dividing line between these eras. But it's just shocking to me that, even in, like, you would expect sort of the way organizations approach their or how they manage their workforce to be, again, this is my naivety, but like you would expect it to be like idiosyncratic to the type of work they're doing. And yet the strong force, the macro force, to your point, for UC Berkeley, which you guys aren't producing, like there's no machines running, right? I mean, it's all people. It's all, for your organization, it's been knowledge work from the start. And yet the prevailing sort of like framework, the prevailing methodology or the prevailing mindset was that industrial revolution thing. And that's true sort of across the board. It's not like, well, consultants had it right this whole time. No, everybody has had it wrong. Why is that? I mean, what a silly thing to sort of take for granted, that sort of cog in the machine mentality, and apply that over here. What is that whole thing? I mean, it boggles the mind to me.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
It does, and I think we're talking about it now, which is huge.
Yeah. Okay.
So I've been in the learning and development space for 25-ish years. I started my career in executive education back in the late 90s. And in that role, we created leadership development programming that we sold to corporations. So I worked with companies like ExxonMobil, Aramark, the United States Department of Defense was one of my clients. And so we were teaching them all these management concepts, and they were great and they were thoughtful, but it still never occurred to us to say, do we really need to work from 8 to 5 Monday through Friday?
Yeah.
Do we really
I mean, it's just crazy.
Same building?
I mean, is this like a sliced bread thing? Because, the best invention since sliced bread, which was really just, hey, what if we sliced this bread? I mean, is it really just that kind of a thing? Because it's not a new thing, right? Like, it's just bread. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not shock. I mean, it's not like, wow, we're having robots, cars. Like, it's not all that different from the world we live in, but we just, kind of always assume that music came on CDs.
Yeah, right.
Like, do you remember? I remember thinking about, so I watched, when I was a kid, there were cassette tapes, I guess records were kind of, and then there were cassette tapes, and then there were CDs. And I remember talking to my friends and saying, I wonder what the next music delivery thing is going to be. Like, because
you'd seen several at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I saw my parents had these 8-track things, and then we had records, and then there was these tapes and then CDs. But in my mind, it was going to be a thing. It was going to be like another actual thing that you like plugged into another thing to make music happen, because that has been what it had been.
Right.
And then streaming came, and I was like, oh,
that's the thing.
That's the thing.
And the only thing I'm plugging in are headphones to my ears. Yeah.
And it's fascinating. And I think that happens.
Yeah.
But in my, 20-year-old head, it was going to be a thing. It was going to be maybe a smaller CD or a more flexible one that didn't scratch, or
Right.
right. And so it's these, I think what happens is groups of really smart people, really innovative people, really dynamic people get together and they start talking about and sharing ideas, and innovation happens. It's not somebody sitting in a room by themselves building the next thing. It's having diverse groups. We talked about the problem you get into when you are surrounded by like-minded people. Having diverse groups of people get together, talk about the problems they see, talk about the opportunities they see, and figure out something new. And then having enough connectedness to actually make that thing happen.
Yeah, and enough drive to actually do it, to your point.
Yeah, you and I can sit here and have great ideas all day long, but if we don't have a scientist or somebody that owns this, somebody that's connected to that, our ideas could just be us talking. But if you have diverse networks of people that have diverse connections and diverse skills, I think you can really make change happen.
Another big hole in the application of that sort of industrial revolution style, like workplace structure, just an inconsistency in its application in the knowledge work economy is the hole in L&D, let's call it. When you're running a factory, you're like, all right, fine, we're going to run these machines from 9 to 5 every day. And okay, fine, I'm running a business. I'm going to run these people 9 to 5 every day. In the factory setting, you're going to have downtime and you're going to have repair and maintenance. Like that's going to be an expense on your P&L, getting back to my other comment from before. Why do you think that same sort of corollary, or the corollary for, repair and maintenance expense in a manufacturing setting, why is that taking so long to be present on the knowledge work side? Does that question make sense?
It does. And it's super insightful. So your point is really well taken. We know when we have machines that we're producing cogs, there's going to be time for them to be upgraded or maintained or refreshed.
Or checking the dials to see if it's redlining and saying, okay, this thing is running too hot, something is wrong.
Right. Why don't we have that same care for our people now that our people are 100%, producing?
Exactly. You said that way better than I did. So that is my question.
Yeah. And I think it's a wonderful question. And I would love to put that out to masses and say, we know we have to do this for a machine. What on earth makes you think we don't have to do this for a person?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
And so we need to, as organizations, we need to start prioritizing that. How do we look for the red line? How do we see when people are burning out? How do we refresh? How do we, and it's not just about you need to be more resilient. You need to, it's about how do we as organizations support people in taking what they need and give them that time to grow, to upskill, to reskill, whatever it is. But paying attention to those dials.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if it's because machines are very loud. When something is going on with a machine, there's a dial, there's something, they're very loud. And I think some humans, maybe we don't even notice when we're redlining. And so we sit quietly by ourselves thinking, I don't want to make a fuss. I'm just going to sit with this, versus saying, hey, help me. Do our organizations have safe space for people to say that? Are leaders modeling that? Are our leaders saying, you know what, I'm going to take 2 weeks vacation and I'm not going to answer email because I need to refresh?
Just like a machine's going to say, I'm going to take 2 weeks of downtime because I need to get repaired because the cogs I'm spitting out don't work or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, it might be that. I'm just kind of brainstorming and just thinking out loud. I think part of it is, let me just say, I think it's like a heart thing. Mm-hmm. I think it's a heart thing of an organization because you can see, in the manufacturing space, there's a huge spectrum of like companies that are all about safety, and safety just you see everywhere. Or we're all about sort of operational excellence, and those are the companies that will probably have a higher repair and maintenance spend, and they're tuned into their machines more because they're just more focused on them, and they'll probably have a longer life cycle for those machines because they're taking such good care of them, right? Like if you're doing all the recommended maintenance on your car, that's obviously going to last longer than if you're just like, I'll just get an oil change every couple of years or every year or whatever. And so I just think for some reason there's been a disconnect. Look, there's obviously I paint in like these really broad brushstrokes. Like there are organizations that like put their money where their mouth is, to your point from before, and reinforce those things. But it's just almost like it's almost like the world has changed so much so quickly that like we just maybe just haven't adjusted so much. We just haven't adjusted yet. And I don't think we're like built for today's world. Of like I've gotten how many emails, how many notifications I've gotten today? Like a lot. Okay. Like that's not normal. Like my grandfather got no notifications. Maybe he got like a letter in the mail or something. And so, maybe our work, maybe the technological advancement has been so fast and so swift, and it's sort of like just kind of taken us all by surprise, and we're all just trying to keep our head above water. Maybe 100 years from now, they'll look back and they'll be like, man, remember when the internet first came out? And man, they were just, they might look back, maybe this is a question. What practices today do you think 2-3 generations from now we'll look back on and put in the same bucket that we put in people drinking out of lead pipes or like spraying asbestos everywhere or something? Like what do you think those present day things are that people will look back and like shake their head at?
Yeah. I honestly, I hope the 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, I hope that people are like, well, that was a very weird way to work.
Yeah.
Huh. I hope that's one that people really, I hope another one is like, remember when we all had to come to the same cubicle farm and we would sit in a cubicle beside someone else sitting in a cubicle and we would check email all day long and then we would leave? Like, and people call that working in the office and building community. Like, I hope that's another one that people look back on and go, well, that's weird. Like, wonder why we all had to be in the same space to not talk to each other for 5 and 6 hours at a time,
Yeah. Hopefully it'll be like how we look back and like, imagine a 9-year-old was working those big machines back in the 1920s.
Right.
We could never imagine something so like barbaric,
Right. Yeah. I hope that, and I hope that there organizations that are another one. This is a soapbox of mine. The once a year performance evaluation.
Yeah.
Where you spend 3 hours filling out a thesis.
It's so stupid.
Proving that you should keep your job. And then your manager or whoever writes, sometimes they're self-written, sometimes the manager writes them. Sometimes the manager's supposed to write them and the employee writes them themselves anyway. And so then you write this huge thing and it's, based on 15,000 competencies and you write all these words justifying the fact that you need to keep your job. And then you go and you talk to your manager and generally someone cries or someone yells or, sometimes they go really well. And even when they go really well, you put it in a drawer and a year later, you're like, shit, I have to write my performance evaluation again. I hope that is something that we look back on and go, wow, that was really not the way to take care of people and support their success.
It's nuts. So I'm with you 100%. I think that they're so antiquated. They're bizarre. They're so influent. It's not like people are keeping notes throughout the year for that. They're doing it like a week before it's due or maybe the night before it's due.
Yeah.
And
recency bias,
totally. Right? Well, there's not only the recency bias thing, but there's also like, what if your dog just died when you're doing that? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
I mean, there's so much.
Day.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. There's such a massive error factor in whatever conclusion comes into it as a function of it being an annual thing. But it's also hard on the other side of it, I think, for managers to. Well, I think there's two things. Managers, for some reason, well, maybe not for some reason, maybe it's pretty obvious. Like, it's hard for folks to give kind of consistent feedback forever, like continuously, right? Like that's something that folks struggle with as well. And then there's this interesting, i.e., annoying other factor that I think is continuing to hold us back, where there's a lot of like certifications that organizations have to get, and this is just something that came to mind. There's a ton of certifications that organizations need to get to show their quality. They're ISO certified. They have SOC 2 or whatever. And in those certifications, in many of them, not all, of course, but like in many of them, there is something that those auditors to confirm that certification are looking for around annual performance reviews.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? So like there are these sort of barnacles on the ship that are causing the ship to not get fixed or something. It's a really interesting kind of headwind to move away from this, to your point, this really antiquated way of doing business.
Yeah. When we refresh the way we do performance evaluations at Berkeley, you're exactly right. At the University of California, there's a policy and it says all employees must have an annual performance evaluation.
There you go.
And so we said, okay, how can we stay in that box? Like, how can we say, yes, and still updated. So when we did our research 5 or so years ago, we heard that 48% of our employees talked to their managers about their performance once per year.
Wow.
48% said, I only talk to my manager about how I'm doing one time a year. Like,
That's crazy.
that's crazy. And this was, 6 years ago. This wasn't 30 years ago.
What was the highest bucket on there?
What's
On
your
that
question?
question, was it
Mhm.
like often, once a year, never, or something like that? Was it like that, or was like
Yeah,
how did you get to the once a year? Like, what
So
other
it was-
options were available for them to answer something beyond, like, beside once per year?
Yeah, I think we asked, they talk about it weekly, monthly,
Got it. Yeah, yeah.
yearly, other.
And it probably looked exactly how I would expect.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Like never was probably 15-ish%, 50% were once a year, and then
And
it
then it
kind of
just
fell
dropped off. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
And this was pre-COVID. And so we said, we need to do something about this. And there were definitely voices that were saying, but the policy says all
Right.
employees need to perform
Right.
once a year. Like, I appreciate that the policy says that. Let's figure out how we can still do that, but also build a program where people are talking to their manager a little bit more about how they're doing and what they need to succeed. So there's going to be voices, I think, in every organization that are like, but this is what the policy says. This is what the compliance is. This is what the state requires. This is what the federal requires. And you obviously have to stay in that path.
Yeah.
But those paths are generally wide enough that you can get creative and
That's a
not
great
break
point.
the rules, not break the law.
Totally. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But do something that's more human.
Well, yeah, you can change the inputs to the extent necessary to get the outcome you want while still staying within those sort of policy or certification, requirements.
It just takes having a group of people that have a diverse point of view. So when they read that, they say, what about? And then instead of getting shot down immediately by the person that's like, that'll never work. We tried it 5 years ago. It's not going to work. Like having a true open brainstorm where people can just throw out ideas and not get shot down.
Right.
And put out I think maybe this is another thing that we're going to stop hearing around conference tables or Zoom rooms. We tried that already and it didn't work.
Right.
Like we know the world has changed so much in the last couple of years. I mean, things that we tried a couple of years ago, maybe they will work now. Or
maybe there's new tools, or maybe we didn't, how many times can you with certainty say, well, I've tried everything? It's like never. You can never with certainty say you tried everything, to your point.
Yeah.
But, it's just this like paradox to me. It's this conundrum because, our voluntary turnover is higher than it's ever been.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Our the reasons why people change jobs, that data is very easy to find, whether you don't want to find it for your own organization, you just want to look broadly. A major reason, if not a top reason, is due to they're leaving jobs to get more opportunities somewhere else, more development opportunities. And so that's on the one side, that's on the supply of labor side. And on the demand of labor side, where we see that supply playing out, what do we see? We see, like I said, higher turnover than ever. And we see a global engagement level of under 70%. So people are not engaged. They're not getting the opportunities they want. They're changing jobs more than ever. And again, if we think back to our old industrial revolution style, whatever you called it, a production economy, think about if machines had legs, they would obviously be going to an organization that was going to be doing repair and maintenance so that they didn't get run down. Why are we not oh my gosh, this is such a massive cost on our organization? The cost of turnover is brutal. You know what I'm saying? The cost of employee engagement, while a silent killer, is really high, even if that number is generally correct. That 70% engagement level is generally correct. And if we could brush a couple of crumbs off the table to groups like yours to start to build out this coaching culture and provide true opportunities for people to do learning and development, either that they self-select into or that they need for their own career. If that could raise the level of engagement and drop that turnover, that would all fall to the bottom line at the end of the day, whatever that bottom line is for your organization. And yet, here's my question, and yet leadership at large or leadership in aggregate still hasn't had that light bulb turned on. What's it going to take? Another 100 years? Is it going to take them finally listening to the ethics experts or what? How do we get that light bulb on? Because it seems like it's definitely a positive ROI investment. It's definitely a
100%.
better culture. It's definitely a physical manifestation of your whoever's so-called commitment to people. And yet it's not happening still.
Yeah. You know how I think one of the ways I think we get it to happen is by getting people in those leadership positions who have experienced life a little bit differently than our typical CEOs.
It's kind of your diversity point from before, like in action or in ascension or something. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think getting people with different lived experiences, getting people with different career paths, not every CEO needs to be a white man that's 6'3" and went to Stanford
Berkeley.
or USC or Harvard or whatever it is. There has to be ways that we start seeing human talent and human potential through transferable skills. We need to break that paper ceiling. We need, the degree ceiling. We need to break the glass ceiling. We need to get people sitting around those tables making decisions and having the conversations. And you just need one brave soul to raise their hand and go, "Are you sure?" Or "Help me understand why." Someone to just ask the question and get people talking about, oh, we do have a different workforce. The workforce doesn't look like the workforce when I was fresh out of college. I think sometimes get so disengaged that we don't understand a 22-year-old right now today has a very different aspect, a very different hope and dream than we even had at 22. I heard somebody the other day saying, gosh, kids are just not as resilient as they used to be. And working at a top public research institution, that bothered me intensely because you know what? When you were 19, if you had to deal with Facebook and Instagram and cyberbullying and having a picture of yourself doing something stupid, like blathered across the world, like
defining you,
right? Like I don't know that you would be as resilient as you think you would be either. Like the world is different, it's changed, and we need to stop saying, well, when I was 20, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And start saying, oh, this is interesting. This is what you are dealing with at 20. Let's figure out what that means.
Well, it's such like a thoughtless attribution analysis.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's to come to that conclusion, there are a ton of unspoken assumptions behind that conclusion that are usually not accounting for any of these things, or it's at least saying that the things that you just mentioned are non-factors. Those are non-needle movers. But like, also think about what we're talking about is like a perspective, right? People's output in the world is a function of the lens that they see that world through. You know what I'm saying? And if you're laden with a ton of student debt, or all of your friends are in that same boat, or think of the homogeny of perspective for my grandfather who was coming back from the war, and the homogeny of perspective around what the American dream was and the achievability of it, right? Like there was a pretty, and again, I wasn't alive then, but I'm just saying it seems to me from, things that I've read and so forth, that was a pretty dialed in kind of picture of what the American dream was. And there was a pretty high proportion of people that believed they could achieve that. I think now that picture is a lot more sort of amorphous. And the percentage of people that think they can achieve whatever that old dream was, whether it was the 80s one or the 90s one or the 50s one, is definitely a lot shorter or a lot smaller. You know what I'm saying? And so what role does that play on the perspective that people have? If for shorthand, the American dream was to become a millionaire or whatever, let's just use that as shorthand. And then today, nobody believes they can become a millionaire, and they're surrounded by a bunch of people in their peer group who also don't think that, because they're all dealing with these same kind of struggles, student debt, COVID, whatever, social, all those kinds of things. Well, then the proportion of people that believe that they could achieve that is obviously going to be like way lower. I'm just saying that's like a big factor as well. And I think it's easy for a generation to say, oh, music today stinks. And it's like, well, everybody said that about my music when I was young. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's the same story over and over again. And it's such kind of like a cop-out attribution to say like, oh, kids today just are idiots, or kids today are lazy, Yeah.
Yeah. You just sparked something for me. We talk a lot about burnout. So people are really burning out.
Yeah.
And I think there's a misconception. Some people think that burnout happens because you work too hard or you work too long. That's simply not true. Like, there are people in startups here in Silicon Valley that work 90 hours a week and they are not burnt out. They're
Right.
feeling energized and excited, but it's because they know they're part of something bigger. They think they can succeed, and they're surrounded with people who think they can
Exactly.
succeed. So how about we stop talking about burnout being, something that is like, oh, you're just lazy and you don't want to work that hard, to say, as an organization, what can I do? I can help people feel like what we're doing matters. I can put them in situations where they're with teams where they're contributing to something bigger than themselves. I can grow them and develop them and help them find their people and find their skills and find their passion. And it's not about, let's have, a 4-day work week, or maybe it is. I don't know. It might be.
It's not necessarily that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. In my perspective, it's the organization can say, you matter. What you're doing is blazingly important. Look at the people's lives you're changing. Or, maybe that's not the passion for everybody. It's look at the new thing that you made. Look at the way you changed the world. Look at the way you impacted how XYZ people think, feel, whatever it is, whatever it is that ignites the passion within the people in the organization, what brings them there, focusing on that and focusing on how each person in the space is contributing to that, versus what you were just talking about, where a bunch of people sit around and think, gosh, I'm never going to get the American dream. Like, there's no way for me to get there. Of course you're going to feel burnt out if you don't see that North Star or that path, that light at the end of the tunnel to get you to what is important and to get you to your happy place.
Yeah, I think, maybe burnout is not just, to your point, working hard. It's it's feeling like you're working hard for nothing. And that nothing is not just money. It can be, to your point, purpose or impact or all those kinds of things. And I don't know. It's just, I'm sure whatever we're experiencing is not like we're not the first people to experience this kind of a dynamic where there's this sort of generational shift and there's these different perspectives. I mean, at the end of the day, most of the folks in middle management are managing a world that's way different than the world that they grew up in. And because that world, while the change has come fast, in retrospect, as that change is happening, you're not really noticing it. Like, I saw a picture of an old iPhone before, like from 10 or 15 years ago or something. And I was just like, oh my gosh, dude, that iPhone looks like crazy. But at the time, it didn't look crazy at all. And I don't remember the gradual changes in it because I was kind of a part of it. So, I think just kind of, maybe the big theme for today is intentionality. We need to have an intentionality with how we think about things. We have to have an intentionality with like the kind of spaces we end up building and the things we do to prove that our heart for the creation of those spaces is real and not just a bunch of words. And we have to have some, maybe I'm just kind of talking about empathy, which you can't really have without understanding, understanding what that current plight is. It's probably going to give you some better perspectives on how to, get the most out of, your machines, which are going to be which are going to have a totally different lived experience. And, what I like about this conversation is we're both right. No, I'm just kidding. Well, we are. But what I like about the conversation is there's a certain openness around this, and there's a certain, it just seems to be like we need to know that we might be getting something wrong in order to change it, and an openness to, like, I'm not judging sort of the old way or the new generation. I'm not saying like, oh, they shouldn't think that way. That's first of all, like a stupid thing to say. And it's just kind of, it is what it is. And an understanding of what the dynamic that's in play, I think is critical for us to drive any meaningful change in our workplaces or in the employee experience, for our companies.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. It's asking questions to understand, not asking questions to judge.
Yeah, right.
It's responding to questions to help, not responding to questions to defend. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I think about a lot is the world, to your point, the world has probably always been a little bit on fire. Right now, though, because of the way social media and I think it was when Dick Cheney was vice president, he changed the law that said news organizations no longer had to provide both sides of the story. We could have polarizing politically motivated news sources. So so he was president or vice president with Bush. So I mean, this wasn't all that long ago, where we started growing these news organizations who were very one-sided.
Right.
And so all of a sudden we're surrounded with information about plight and tragedy and very monochromatic viewpoints.
Totally.
And all of
This is a
that,
great point.
I think
Yeah.
it's just, it's overwhelming.
Well, and it also
it
kind of creates
perpetuates.
a thought culture that we're all
Yes.
kind of falling into. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, this is the view, this is the right thing, and it's like it's so much more gray. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think
That's a great point. That's interesting.
I think the empathy piece is huge. I think, yeah, asking questions to understand, responding to help. You know, thinking, not judging. Well, when I was, because the world is different,
Totally.
and being open to. I don't know. Maybe virtual reality will help us with this, but it's really hard to do something that you've not experienced. So what I mean by that is, so when, for example, to teach an online class, if you've never been a student in
I
an
see.
online class,
There you go.
it's
Great
really
point.
hard to be a professor in an online
Right.
class.
Well, carry
You know?
that forward to a manager. If you've never gone
Right.
through sort of the current generation experience, how do you manage those people and understand
Right.
it? You know,
Yeah.
I mean,
And
man,
so how do you do that?
you know, there's so many factors that are. I mean, human beings are perhaps like the worst things at like an accurate attribution analysis. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like there's so many people who became millionaires in the 80s, and I'm sure they were smart people, but I mean, there's tons of smart people that don't make any money, and there's tons of, you know, geniuses who don't have any impact. I mean, there's so many different circumstances, and it's so easy to like point to yourself for somebody who's successful and say, well, yeah, that was me. Well, maybe there was, you know, maybe there was a huge expansionary economy, or there was a, you know, an expansionary Fed policy that caused, you know, money to be very cheap, and that drove a bunch of like aggregate demand expansion, and you just sort of rode this wave. You know what I mean? Like, and I think,
And good for you. Yay.
yeah, and good for you,
Now,
but also
what
you
do we
didn't.
do for-
Yeah, but like if you're riding a big wave, you probably didn't make the wave.
Right.
But it's easy to be like, look at this huge wave. Look how high I am right now. You know what I mean? And so I think if we can just, you know, maybe it's just kind of comes down to like a little bit of like humility and, you know, empathy. Back to your point, because it is just such a, you know, I was on social this week and there was this video going around of these two, I think they were Gen Zers who kind of just got out of college, and they were like literally crying on TikTok about, you know, how am I supposed to make this 9 to 5 work? And just the comments, to your point, were very polarizing. And you could almost see like, oh, I could guess people's generation by those responses, you know? And it's like, it's easy to be inaccurate, you know?
Yeah.
It's easy to like, you know, and again, I'm just rambling a little bit now, but like that negativity bias that all humans have might be like the biggest contributor for it, which is in the absence of information, we tend to fill in the gaps with negative information, you know? And so if you don't know what that
100%.
actually feels like, well, then you're going to attribute it to laziness. I saw this other tweet a couple of months ago, which I thought was so funny. You know, it was like, you know, people, you know, kids today are lazy. That was kind of the thing. And so it showed a magazine clipping from like this year that said it. And then it showed one from last year that said it. And last year, I'm telling you, they had clippings going back like 80 years. And every single year was some clipping from some newspaper saying the exact same thing. So it's like, okay, well, if that's like the general tendency, if all new music sucks for every generation that's come before you, well, like, does the music actually suck, or is it really just a function of like what you grew up listening to? You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100% lived experience. And yeah, you know, people wanting their space to be the right space.
Right.
Yeah.
Man, this was fun. See, I had a good feeling about this one.
It was so fun hanging out with you today and chatting a little bit on a sunny Friday here in Northern California. I don't know what the weather's like in your space, but
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice
Friday
here
here,
today.
so it's gonna be
We
great.
don't have the consistency of beautiful weather that you have, but we got a good one today.
Awesome.
Angela, where can people find you and reach out to you?
Yes, I have a very unique last name, which is good for me. I think I'm the only Angela Stopper on LinkedIn. So ping me on LinkedIn. Let me know you heard us talking here. Let me know you want to connect. Happy to keep the conversation going. You know, I think exactly what we've talked about. We are at a precipice here. We are at a time when we can make change. We are at a time when we can look at some of those habits. We can look at what's happening in our boardrooms. We can look at what's happening in our workforces, and we can start pushing for diversity, diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of just humans. We can start talking about care and empathy and understanding. All of these things are critical right now. So if anybody else out there is like-minded, reach out. If you disagree completely, reach out too, because I'd love to have a conversation to help me understand your points of view as well.
Yeah, reach out to me so I can block you, please. Just kidding. All right. Well, we will see you all next time. Thank you, Angela. We'll talk to you soon.